He was Modoc, bound by blood oath never to let his heart cloud his judgment. But the moment Serafina Langley looked at him with those storm-grey eyes, every vow he'd ever sworn began to crumble like dust in the wind. The trading post at Fort Klamath smelled of tobacco, sweat, and desperation when Luther first heard about the job. He'd come down from the lava beds seeking ammunition and supplies, not work, but 3 months of failed hunting, and a harsh winter had left his pockets empty and his pride wounded. The Modoc people had been pushed onto reservation land they didn't want, forced to share territory with their old enemies the Klamath, and men like Luther found themselves caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. "You're the tracker they talk about," the fort's quartermaster said, eyeing Luther with the mixture of suspicion and need that most white men showed him. "The one who found those missing soldiers last spring." Luther said nothing, just met the man's gaze with the steady patience his grandfather had taught him. Let them fill the silence with their own nervousness. Let them reveal what they needed before you showed your hand. "There's a woman," the quartermaster continued, lowering his voice though the trading post was nearly empty. "Serafina Langley. Her father owns the Langley Mining Company up in the Siskiyous. She's been staying here at the fort for 2 months, came down for supplies and got stranded when her escort took ill. Now she needs to get back home before the mountain passes close for winter." "Plenty of men can guide," Luther said, his English careful and precise, learned from missionaries who'd tried and failed to save his soul. "Why me?" The quartermaster glanced around nervously. "Because the route goes through contested territory. Modoc land, Shasta land, places where a white guide might get them both killed. Her father's offering $200 in gold, plus supplies, to whoever gets her home safe. I figured a man of your skills could use that kind of money. $200. It was more than Luther had seen in 5 years. Enough to buy rifles for his people, enough to secure good horses, enough to give his younger sister a proper dowry so she wouldn't have to marry the drunken Klamath warrior their uncle had chosen. Enough to matter. "I want half now," Luther said. "Not possible. Miss Langley holds the payment. She'll give you 50 now. The rest when you deliver her safely to her father's compound," the quartermaster replied. "Those are the terms. Take them or leave them." Luther considered walking away. He'd sworn after the last time, after guiding those missionaries who'd looked at him like he was something dirty they'd stepped in, that he'd never hire himself out to white people again. But winter was coming, his people were hungry, and pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. "I'll meet her," he said finally. The quartermaster's relief was visible. "Good. She's staying in the officers' quarters. I'll take you there now. Fair warning, though, she's got opinions about everything and isn't shy about sharing them. Caused quite a stir, rejecting every guide who's applied so far." They crossed the muddy parade ground, past soldiers drilling half-heartedly in the autumn drizzle. Fort Klamath was a dismal place, hastily built and poorly maintained, existing primarily to keep watch over the Modoc and Klamath peoples who'd been forced onto the nearby reservation. Luther had been born free in the lava beds to the south, had grown up hunting and fishing in land his people had occupied for generations. Now that land was protected by the government, and his people were expected to be grateful for the privilege of starving on someone else's territory. The officers' quarters were only slightly less depressing than the rest of the fort, rough timber buildings with canvas roofs that leaked when it rained. The quartermaster knocked on one of the doors, and a woman's voice called out to enter. Luther had expected someone older, perhaps weathered by frontier life, maybe bitter about her situation. What he found instead made him forget how to breathe for a moment. Serafina Langley stood by the room's single window, silhouetted against the grey afternoon light. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 25 years old, with dark honey-coloured hair pulled back in a practical braid. But it was her eyes that struck him, storm-grey and intelligent, studying him with the same careful assessment he was giving her. She wore men's trousers under a long coat, and her hands showed calluses that spoke of real work, not the soft, pampered existence he'd expected. "This is Luther," the quartermaster said. "He's Modoc, knows the territory better than anyone, and he's willing to take the job. Willing isn't the same as capable, Serafina said, her voice lower and steadier than Luta had expected. She moved toward him with a directness that was distinctly unfeminine by white standards. Can you get me through the Siskiyous before the passes close, Mr. Luta? Just Luta, he corrected. And yes, if you can ride hard and don't slow us down with unnecessary baggage. Her eyebrows rose slightly. I've been riding since I was 4 years old, and everything I brought is necessary. The question is whether you can be trusted. The last 3 guides who applied were more interested in my father's gold than my safe arrival. I'm interested in the gold, Luta said bluntly, but I give my word when I take a job. My word means something. Something flickered in her expression, approval perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. The others all told me what I wanted to hear. You're the first one who's been honest, she said. She moved to a small desk and retrieved a leather pouch. $50 now, as agreed. The rest when we reach my father's compound. The journey should take 12 days if weather holds. 10 days, Luta corrected, accepting the pouch and checking its contents. Maybe 9 if you truly can ride like you claim. But we leave tomorrow at first light, and we don't stop for comfort. The Siskiyous are dangerous this time of year. Early snows, hostile bands, and your father's mining operations have made enemies in the territory. I'm aware of the dangers, Serafina said coolly. Why do you think I've been so particular about choosing a guide? The quartermaster cleared his throat. Well then, seems like you two have reached an understanding. Luta, you'll need to sign some papers, standard agreement that you'll be held responsible for Miss Langley's safety and such. I don't sign papers, Luta said flatly. My word is my bond, or it isn't. No white man's document will make it more true. Now see here, the quartermaster began, but Serafina held up a hand. It's fine, Mr. Henderson. If Luta says his word is sufficient, I'll accept that, she said, then turned back to Luta. But understand this, I'm not some helpless woman who needs protecting. I can shoot, I can ride, and I can take care of myself. What I need is someone who knows the land and can get me through it. Are we clear? For the second time, Luta found himself caught off guard. White women didn't talk like this, didn't carry themselves with this kind of confidence. We're clear, he said. First light means first light. Not dawn, not when you finish breakfast. When the sky begins to pale in the east, we ride. I'll be ready, she said. As Luta left the officer's quarters, he found himself troubled in a way he couldn't quite name. The job was straightforward, the payment was good, and the woman seemed capable enough. But something about Serafina Langley unsettled him, made him aware of her in a way that had nothing to do with the job, and everything to do with the quiet strength in her eyes. The way she'd met him as an equal, rather than looking down at him as most white people did. That night, Luta made camp outside the fort, rather than accepting the quartermaster's offer of a bed in the enlisted men's barracks. He'd learned long ago that accepting white hospitality came with invisible strings, expectations and obligations that could trap a man. Better to sleep under the stars, even in the cold drizzle, than to owe anyone anything. He was checking his gear, ensuring his rifle was clean and his supplies adequate when he heard footsteps approaching. His hand moved instinctively to his knife before he recognized Serafina's silhouette in the darkness. I didn't mean to startle you, she said, stopping a respectful distance from his fire. May I join you for a moment? Luta gestured to a spot across the fire. She settled there with an ease that surprised him, seemingly unbothered by the damp ground or the impropriety of a woman alone with a man at night. I wanted to apologize if I was curt earlier, she said. The truth is, I've been stuck at this fort for 2 months, treated like delicate china by every man here, and I'm frustrated. You're the first person who's spoken to me like I have sense, and I may have been defensive. You don't need to apologize to me, Luta said, adding wood to the fire. Your frustration is your own business. Still, we're going to be traveling together for 10 days. It seems wise to start on better footing. She paused, studying him across the flames. The quartermaster said you found those missing soldiers last spring. He didn't mention you'd also saved their lives, fought off the raiders who'd ambushed them, and carried the wounded lieutenant on your back for 3 miles. I heard that story from one of the soldiers. Luta shrugged. I did what the job required. That's more than what the job required, she countered. That's going beyond duty into something else. Compassion, maybe. Integrity. She leaned forward slightly. That's why I chose you, Luta. Not because you're Modoc and know the land, though that matters, but because when I asked about you, everyone had the same thing to say. Your word is iron, once given, never broken. Something twisted in Luta's chest, an uncomfortable weight. She was right. His word was everything to him, the last piece of honor he had left in a world that had taken nearly everything else. But she didn't know about the other oath he'd sworn, the one his grandfather had made him speak over his mother's grave. Never let your heart lead you, his grandfather had said. Never let emotion cloud your judgment. We are Modoc, we are warriors. Our strength comes from our clarity of mind and purpose. Promise me, Luta. Promise me you'll never let a woman make you forget who you are, he'd promised. He'd been 14 years old, watching his mother's body burn on the funeral pyre, and he'd sworn that oath with all the fervor of a grieving boy. His mother had died because his father had let love cloud his judgment, had taken risks to impress her, had died trying to prove something that needed no proving. Luta had vowed never to make the same mistake. You're thinking about something, Serafina observed. Something heavy. Just planning the route, Luta lied. We'll follow the Klamath River northwest, then cut through the passes before the high country. It'll be cold, but faster than the low route. She accepted the deflection, seemingly content to let the silence stretch between them. The fire crackled, sending sparks spiraling into the misty darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called, lonely and haunting. Can I ask you something? Serafina said finally. Why did you take this job? Henderson said you usually refuse to guide white people. Luta considered lying, then decided she'd earned honesty. My people are hungry. The reservation land is poor. The government rations are insufficient, and winter is coming. $200 can buy rifles for hunting, can buy horses, can buy dignity. Oh, that's worth swallowing my pride for 10 days. She nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. Most men would have given me some noble reason, made themselves sound better than they are. I'm not most men, Luta said. No, she agreed, her grey eyes reflecting firelight. You're certainly not. There was something in her tone, something that made Luta's pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with danger and everything to do with the intelligence in her gaze, the strength in her bearing. The way she sat across from him, like they were equals in a world that insisted they were anything but. He stood abruptly. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a hard day's ride. Serafina rose as well, brushing off her trousers. You're right. Thank you for letting me intrude on your camp. She turned to go, then paused. Luta, I just want you to know I don't see you the way most of my people do. I don't think you're savage or inferior or any of those ignorant things. My mother was Yurok from the coast. She taught me that blood doesn't determine worth, character does. I hope we can be, well, perhaps not friends, but at least respectful companions on this journey. She left before he could respond, disappearing into the darkness toward the fort. Luta stood staring after her, his grandfather's warning echoing in his mind. Never let your heart lead you. Never let a woman make you forget who you are. But as he lay down to sleep that night, it wasn't his grandfather's voice he heard. It was the memory of storm-gray eyes meeting his with perfect equality, and the uncomfortable realization that 10 days might not be nearly enough time, or far too much. The sky was still black when Luta woke, though the eastern horizon showed the first pale hints of approaching dawn. He'd slept poorly, his dreams haunted by his grandfather's stern face and Serafina's penetrating gaze, the two images warring in his mind like opposing forces. He rose quietly, rolled his blanket and kicked dirt over the fire's cold ashes. The fort was silent, except for the restless stamping of horses in the stables and the distant call of a sentry marking the hour. He was saddling his horse, a sturdy paint gelding he'd raised from a colt. when he heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Serafina emerged from the darkness, leading a fine-looking mare and carrying 2 heavy saddlebags. She was dressed in practical traveling clothes, her hair braided tightly, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the morning chill. No unnecessary frills, no impractical baggage. She'd meant what she said about being ready. "You're early," Luta said, surprised despite himself. "You said first light." "I took you at your word," she replied, swinging her saddlebags onto her mare with practiced ease. "I also brought supplies from the fort stores. Coffee, dried meat, hardtack, and some medical supplies. My father always said preparedness is the difference between survival and disaster." Luta examined the supplies she'd chosen and found himself grudgingly impressed. She'd packed smartly, nothing wasted, everything necessary. "Your father is a wise man." "He's a practical man," she corrected. "There's a difference. Wisdom requires understanding consequences beyond immediate profit. My father understands profit very well." There was something bitter in her tone, something that suggested complications Luta didn't want to explore. They mounted in silence as the sky shifted from black to deep purple. The fort's gates stood open, unmanned at this early hour, and they rode through without ceremony or farewell. The world beyond was quiet, wrapped in the hushed anticipation that always preceded dawn. Their horses' breath plumed white in the cold air, and frost glittered on the grass like scattered diamonds. For the first hour, they rode without speaking, following the Klamath River north, as it cut through stands of pine and fir. The terrain was familiar to Luta, every bend and crossing mapped in his memory from countless hunting trips. He set a steady pace, fast enough to cover ground, but not so fast that it would exhaust the horses. They had a long day ahead, and many more after that. The sun finally broke over the eastern peaks, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. Serafina pulled alongside him, her mare matching his gelding's stride. "How far will we travel today?" she asked. "To the hot springs near Crater Lake if we maintain this pace." "About 40 miles, Luta replied, scanning the tree line out of habit. "We'll make camp there tonight, rest the horses, then push through the high passes tomorrow before weather moves in." 40 miles is ambitious, she observed, but there was no complaint in her voice, just acknowledgement of fact. "You said you could ride," Luta reminded her. "I can," she assured him. "I was just making conversation, not objecting." She paused, then added, "You don't talk much, do you?" "Words should have purpose." "Silence is often more honest," he said, then felt foolish for the philosophical turn. She probably thought him strange, this taciturn Indian guide who spoke in riddles. But Serafina smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her serious face. "My mother used to say something similar. She said white people filled the air with empty words because they were afraid of what silence might reveal about themselves." "Your mother was Yurok," Luta said, remembering what she'd mentioned the night before. "But you grew up in white society. My mother died when I was 8. Viva took her during a hard winter." Serafina's voice went quiet. "After that, my father raised me in his world. He loved her, I think, in his way, but he was also ashamed of her heritage. He never spoke of her people, never acknowledged that part of me. I grew up caught between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither." The words struck Luta with unexpected force because they mirrored his own experience so precisely. He'd been raised Modoc, proud and free, but the world had changed around him. Now he spoke English better than some whites, wore their clothes when necessary, took their money for work. His own people sometimes looked at him with suspicion, wondering if he'd become too much like the enemy. And whites would never see him as anything but savage, no matter how well he spoke their language or understood their ways. "I know what that feels like," he said quietly. "Being caught between—" She looked at him with those storm-grey eyes, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. They were both halflings in their own way, straddling worlds that wanted them to choose sides, to be one thing or another, never accepting that a person could contain multitudes. The moment stretched, became something more than just shared understanding. Luta felt it like a physical thing, a connection forming, despite his better judgment, despite his grandfather's warning, despite every promise he'd made to himself. This woman, this complicated, strong, honest woman, was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with the journey ahead. He broke eye contact first, turning his attention back to the trail. "We should move faster. There's weather coming in from the west." If Serafina noticed the abrupt shift, she didn't comment. They urged their horses into a canter, leaving behind that moment of connection, even as it continued to echo in Luta's mind like a bell that had been struck and would not stop ringing. By midday, the weather Luta had predicted arrived with vengeance. Dark clouds rolled in from the Pacific, turning the sky the color of bruised flesh, and within minutes a cold rain began to fall. Not the gentle autumn drizzle of the lowlands, but the hard, driving rain of the mountains that soaked through clothing and chilled to the bone. Serafina pulled her coat tighter but didn't complain, didn't ask to stop or seek shelter. She simply bent her head against the weather and kept riding. They followed the Klamath River as it narrowed and grew more turbulent, the water churning white over rocks that had been dry crossing points just weeks ago. Luta kept them moving along the eastern bank, guiding them through dense forest where the trees offered some protection from the worst of the downpour. His paint gelding picked its way carefully over roots and fallen logs, and Serafina's mare followed with the sure-footedness of a mountain-bred horse. Around noon, Luta spotted something that made him raise his hand in warning. Serafina reined in immediately, her hand moving to the rifle strapped to her saddle. She'd seen it too, the broken branches, the disturbed earth, the signs of recent passage. Someone had come through here within the last day, moving fast and careless. "How many?" Serafina asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the rain. "4 riders, maybe 5, Luta dismounted, examining the tracks more closely. Shod horses, so not Modoc or Shasta. Probably miners or prospectors, heading to the diggings." He touched the edge of a hoofprint, feeling how the rain had softened but not yet obliterated it. 8 hours ahead of us, no more." "Are they a threat?" she asked. "Everyone is a threat until proven otherwise," Luta replied, remounting. "We'll stay alert, keep distance between us and them if possible. Desperate men do desperate things, and a woman traveling with an Indian guide makes an easy target for those looking for trouble." They continued northwest, but Luta altered their route slightly, taking them higher into the foothills where the terrain was rougher but more defensible. The rain intensified as the afternoon wore on, turning the trail into a muddy ribbon that sucked at the horses' hooves. Visibility dropped to mere yards, the world shrinking to grey curtains of water and the dark shapes of trees emerging like ghosts from the mist. It was in this reduced visibility that they nearly rode into an ambush. Luta's instincts saved them. Some subtle wrongness in the landscape, perhaps the unnatural stillness of birds that should have been sheltering, or maybe just the warrior's sixth sense his grandfather had spent years cultivating. Whatever the reason, he suddenly jerked his horse to a halt and threw up his hand. Serafina stopped immediately, her hand already on her rifle. "What is it?" she whispered. Before Luta could answer, a man stepped onto the trail ahead of them. He was rough-looking, beard matted with rain, eyes hard as creek stones. His rifle rested casually in the crook of his arm, pointed nowhere specific but ready to move. 2 more men emerged from the trees on either side, flanking them with practiced precision. "Well now," the first man said, his voice carrying a false friendliness that set Luta's teeth on edge. "Fancy meeting other travelers in this godforsaken weather. We thought we were the only fools crazy enough to be out in this." "We're just passing through," Luta said, his hand sliding toward the knife at his belt. His rifle was in its scabbard, too slow to draw. The knife would have to be his first weapon. "No trouble intended." "Trouble," the man laughed, but it was a sound without humor. "Who said anything about trouble? We're just fellow travelers looking to share a fire and maybe some provisions. That mare your lady's riding looks strong. Bet she could carry some extra weight if needed." "The mare isn't for sale," Serafina said, her voice steady despite the obvious danger. "Neither is anything else we're carrying. If you'll excuse us, we need to make camp before dark." The man's eyes shifted to her, and Luta saw the calculation there, the weighing of risks and rewards. 3 armed men against 1 Indian, and a woman. In the man's mind, the odds were clearly in his favor. What he didn't know was that Luta had killed his first man at 15, had survived 3 winters in the lava beds fighting soldiers and rival tribes, had learned to read violence in men's eyes the way others read books. "You're that Langley girl," one of the other men said suddenly, recognition dawning. "From the mining company. Your daddy's got money, don't he?" Luta saw the situation deteriorate in real time. What had been simple robbery was now something more complicated and more dangerous. Kidnapping the daughter of a wealthy mine owner could net these men a fortune, if they were willing to risk the consequences. "My father knows where I am," Serafina said calmly, and Luta had to admire her courage, even as he wished she'd stayed silent. "He's expecting me. If I don't arrive on schedule, he'll send men looking. Army men, experienced trackers. You don't want that kind of attention." "Maybe not," the leader agreed. "But a few days head start, and we could be in California before anyone knows which way we went. Your daddy would pay good money to get his little girl back safe, wouldn't he?" Luta made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He couldn't outdraw 3 rifles, couldn't protect Serafina in a straight fight, but he could create chaos, give her a chance to escape. "Ride," he said quietly to her in Modoc, knowing these white men wouldn't understand. "When I move, you ride hard northwest. Don't look back, don't stop. There's a trading post 20 miles up the river. Go there. I won't leave you," she replied in the same language, and Luta felt something twist in his chest at her loyalty. "You will," he said firmly. "This is not negotiable. When I create the opening, you take it. That's an order." Before she could argue further, Luta acted. He threw his knife with the speed of a striking snake, the blade spinning through the rain to bury itself in the shoulder of the man on the left. The man screamed and dropped his rifle, clutching at the wound. In the same motion, Luta kicked his horse forward directly at the leader, using the animal's bulk as a weapon. Chaos erupted. The leader's rifle went off, the shot going wild as Luta's horse crashed into him, sending him sprawling. The third man swung his weapon toward Serafina, but she'd already spurred her mare into motion, crashing through the underbrush with the desperation of the hunted. The man fired, but the shot went high, torn away by wind and rain. Luta didn't wait to see if she'd escaped. He threw himself from his horse onto the fallen leader, his fists driving into the man's face with brutal efficiency. The man underneath him fought back, strong and mean, his knee driving into Luta's ribs with enough force to crack bone. Pain exploded through Luta's side, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop, because stopping meant death. A rifle butt caught him across the back of his head, and the world went grey and distant. He felt himself being dragged off the leader, felt boots driving into his ribs and stomach. Through the haze of pain, he heard voices arguing about whether to kill him or leave him to die slowly. He tried to rise, tried to fight, but his body wouldn't obey. Then there was a different sound, sharp and commanding. A gunshot that cut through the rain like thunder. The beating stopped. "Step away from him," Serafina's voice, cold and absolute. "Step away, or the next shot won't be a warning." Through blurred vision, Luta saw her. She'd circled back, positioned herself on higher ground with her rifle trained on the 3 men. Her hat was gone, her hair plastered to her skull by rain, but her hands were steady and her eyes were fierce as winter storms. "You stupid woman," the leader spat, wiping blood from his mouth. "You could have ridden free. Now you'll die here with your savage." "He's not a savage, and neither of us is dying today," Serafina replied. "You are going to pick up your wounded friend, you're going to mount your horses, and you're going to ride south. If I ever see any of your faces again, I won't give a warning shot. I'll put a bullet through your eye and sleep soundly that night. Are we clear?" Something in her tone, in the absolute certainty of her words, convinced them. Maybe it was the steadiness of her aim, or maybe it was the recognition that she meant every word. Whatever the reason, they backed away slowly, gathering their wounded companion and their weapons. Within minutes, they disappeared into the rain-soaked forest, leaving only trampled earth and blood-stained mud. Serafina slid down from her position and ran to Luta's side. "Can you stand?" she asked, her hands gentle as they probed his injuries. "I told you to ride," Luta managed, tasting blood in his mouth. "Told you not to look back." "I don't follow orders well," she said, helping him to his feet. "Especially stupid ones. Did you really think I'd leave you to die?" "It would have been the smart choice," he said, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. "You could have reached the trading post safely, safe and alone, or in danger together." She met his eyes, her face inches from his. "I know which I choose. Every time." Something passed between them then, something that made his grandfather's warning seem distant and irrelevant. She'd come back for him. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." When survival and sense demanded she save herself, she turned around and risked everything for a man she barely knew. It was the act of someone who understood loyalty at a bone-deep level, who valued honor over self-preservation. "We need to move," Serafina said, breaking the moment. "They might come back with reinforcements, or decide that dying by my hand is worth the reward." "Can you ride?" Luta tested his weight on his legs, felt the sharp pain in his ribs that meant at least one was cracked. "I can ride," he said, though every breath hurt. "But we need to alter the route. They know we're heading northwest. We'll cut east through the high country, circle around. It'll add a day to our journey, but it's safer. Then east it is," she said, helping him onto his horse. "But first we need to tend those injuries. There's a cave system about 3 miles from here. My mother told me about it years ago. We can shelter there, build a fire, dry out." Luta wanted to argue that they should push on, but the pain and the cold were making rational thought difficult. He nodded, letting her take the lead for the first time since they'd started this journey. She guided them through the forest with surprising confidence, following landmarks that must have been etched in her memory from childhood stories. True to her word, they found the caves as the afternoon faded to early evening. The entrance was partially hidden by an outcropping of rock and a curtain of hanging vines, but inside it opened into a surprisingly spacious chamber with a high ceiling and dry floor. Serafina got Luta settled against one wall, then set about building a fire with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "Take off your shirt," she said once the fire was burning well. "I need to see how bad those ribs are." Luta hesitated, years of ingrained modesty warring with practical necessity. But Serafina was already unpacking medical supplies, her manner professional and impersonal. He pulled off his wet shirt, hissing as the movement sent fresh pain through his torso. Her hands were gentle as she examined his injuries, her touch clinical, but not cold. "2 cracked ribs, maybe 3, she said. "Bad bruising, but nothing life-threatening if we wrap them properly. You're lucky that rifle butt didn't crack your skull. Modoc have hard heads," Luta said, trying for humor through the pain. Apparently, she smiled slightly, then began wrapping his ribs with strips of cloth torn from one of her spare shirts. "This will hurt." It did hurt, but Luta bore it in silence, watching her work with steady hands. She tied off the bandage with practiced efficiency, then checked the lump on the back of his head where he'd been struck. Her fingers probed gently, and despite the pain, Luta found himself acutely aware of her proximity. The scent of rain in her hair, the concentration in her grey eyes. "You'll live," she pronounced finally, sitting back on her heels. "But you need rest. We'll stay here tonight, let you recover strength. We're losing time," Luta protested. "Every day counts if we want to beat the snows through the high passes. We'll make up the time tomorrow," she said firmly. "Right now you're in no condition to ride hard. We rest, we heal, we continue when you're strong enough not to fall off your horse." Her expression softened slightly. "You saved my life back there. Let me return the favor by making sure you don't die from stubbornness." Luta wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was pulling at him like deep water. The warmth of the fire, the comfort of dry shelter, and the bone-deep weariness from the fight all combined to make his eyelids heavy. "Wake me if there's trouble," he managed. "I will," Serafina promised. "Now sleep. I'll keep watch." As consciousness faded, Luta's last clear thought was of her face bent over him, concern in her eyes, and the feeling of her hands gentle on his injuries. His grandfather's warning echoed distantly. "Never let your heart lead you," but the words seemed hollow now, meaningless in the face of what this woman had done. She'd come back for him. In a world of broken promises and shifting loyalties, that simple act of courage meant everything. He dreamed of his grandfather's disapproving face, of his mother's funeral pyre, of all the warnings and oaths and promises that had shaped his life. But through it all, he heard Serafina's voice saying safe and alone, or in danger together, and somehow that mattered more than all the rest. When he woke hours later, the fire had burned down to coals, and night had fully claimed the world outside their cave. Serafina sat at the entrance, wrapped in a blanket, her rifle across her knees. She was silhouetted against the lesser darkness beyond, and for a moment Luta simply watched her. This complicated woman who'd refused to abandon him when doing so would have been safer and smarter. "You're awake," she said without turning, somehow sensing his returned consciousness. "How do you feel?" "Like I was kicked by horses and beaten with rifle butts," Luta said, sitting up carefully. The pain in his ribs was intense but manageable. "But I'll survive." "Have you slept at all?" Some," she lied, and he could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "It's been quiet. No signs of pursuit." "You should rest now," Luta said, standing with difficulty and moving to join her at the cave mouth. "I'll take watch." "Your ribs," she protested, "will hurt whether I'm sitting or lying down," he interrupted. "You've been keeping guard for hours. You need sleep more than I do right now. That's not negotiable." She smiled at his echo of her earlier words, then nodded and moved to the fire. Within minutes of lying down, she was asleep, her body surrendering to exhaustion, with the trust of someone who knew she was protected. Luta sat at the cave entrance through the long night hours, keeping watch while she slept. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and glittering with moisture. Stars emerged from behind the departing clouds, brilliant and cold in the mountain air. Somewhere in the forest a wolf howled, and others answered, their voices carrying across the darkness. As dawn approached and the eastern sky began to pale, Luta found himself thinking about choices and consequences, about oaths sworn and promises kept. His grandfather had warned him never to let his heart lead, to keep emotions separate from duty. But what his grandfather hadn't understood, what perhaps no one could understand without living it, was that sometimes the heart and duty became impossible to separate. Sometimes protecting someone stopped being just a job and became something deeper, something that mattered in ways that had nothing to do with gold or obligation. Serafina had come back for him. In that single act, she'd changed something fundamental in how he saw her, how he saw their journey together. This wasn't just an escort job anymore. It was something else entirely, something dangerous and compelling and absolutely terrifying. They left the cave system at first light, both moving stiffly from their injuries, and the night's cold. The world had been transformed by the storm, every surface gleaming with moisture, the air so clear and sharp it almost hurt to breathe. Serafina helped Luta mount his horse, her hands steadying him when his cracked ribs protested the movement. He didn't thank her, but she didn't seem to expect it. They'd moved beyond the need for such courtesies into something more fundamental. The detour east took them into higher country than Luta had originally planned, following game trails through dense stands of fir and pine. The horses picked their way carefully over ground still slick from rain, and progress was slower than either of them would have liked. But the altitude gave them visibility, allowed them to see any pursuit from miles away. It was a fair trade, safety for speed. Around mid-morning they crested a ridge and Luta pulled his horse to a stop. Below them, spread out like a rumpled blanket, lay a valley he hadn't seen in 5 years. His breath caught in his throat. This was the place where his people had camped before the soldiers came, before they'd been forced onto the reservation. The meadow where he'd learned to hunt, the stream where he'd caught his first salmon, the grove of ancient oaks where his mother had told him stories of their ancestors. "What is it?" Serafina asked, sensing the shift in his mood. "This was my home," Luta said quietly. "Before everything changed. My people lived here for generations, following the seasons, hunting and fishing. Then gold was discovered in the hills to the south, and suddenly our land was needed for something more important than our survival." She was silent for a moment, studying the valley with new eyes. "I'm sorry," she said finally, "for what my people did to yours, for what we continue to do." "You're not responsible for the actions of others," Luta replied, though her words touched something deep in his chest. "But yes, it was taken, like so much else." They descended into the valley, and Luta felt the weight of memory pressing on him with every step. Here was the spot where his father had taught him to make arrows. There was the boulder where he and his cousins had played war games, pretending to be great warriors. Everywhere he looked, ghosts walked beside him, remnants of a life that felt both distant and achingly close. Near the stream, Serafina dismounted and began refilling their water skins. Luta joined her, kneeling beside the clear water and cupping his hands to drink. The cold liquid tasted exactly as he remembered, carrying minerals from the high mountains, pure and clean. "Tell me about them," Serafina said, settling on a flat rock. "Your people, your family. I want to understand." Luta sat beside her, surprised by the request. White people rarely asked about his life before, rarely saw him as someone with history and family and loss. "My grandfather was a shaman," he began, the words coming slowly at first, then faster as memory took hold. "He could read the future in smoke and dreams, or so everyone believed. He was the one who raised me after my parents died, taught me to track, to hunt, to survive." "How did they die?" she asked gently. "My father was killed in a skirmish with Klamath warriors when I was 12. A dispute over fishing rights that turned violent." Luta stared at the water, seeing his father's face reflected there. "My mother never recovered from losing him. She stopped eating, stopped caring for herself. The fever that took her 2 years later was almost a mercy. She'd been dying slowly since the day my father fell." Serafina's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. It was a simple gesture, human comfort offered without expectation of reciprocation. Luta found himself gripping her hand like it was an anchor in turbulent waters. "My grandfather blamed my father's death on love," Luta continued, the words spilling out now in a way they never had before. "Said he'd been showing off for my mother, taking unnecessary risks to prove his courage. He made me swear an oath over her funeral pyre, promised that I'd never let emotion cloud my judgment, never let a woman make me forget my duty and my people." Understanding dawned in Serafina's eyes. "And now you're breaking that oath." "I don't know what I'm doing," Luta admitted, and the confession felt like stepping off a cliff. "You came back for me yesterday. You risked everything when the smart choice was to save yourself. That changes things. That makes this," he gestured between them, "complicated in ways I wasn't prepared for." "Life is complicated," Serafina said. "Love even more so. But maybe your grandfather was wrong. Maybe emotion and duty don't have to be enemies. Maybe they can strengthen each other. Is that what this is?" Luta asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Love—" She met his gaze, and he saw uncertainty there mixed with determination. "I don't know yet. But it's something that matters. Something worth protecting." She paused, then added, "My father wanted me to marry a mine owner in Sacramento. Rich man, good family, all the right connections. That's why I was at Fort Klamath, supposedly visiting before the wedding. But I couldn't go through with it. Couldn't commit my life to a man I didn't love. Didn't even like. So you ran," Luta said, understanding now why she'd seemed so desperate to return home. "I told my father I needed time to think, and he gave me 2 months. That time is almost up." She looked away, her jaw tight. "When we reach his compound, he'll expect an answer. He'll expect me to fulfill my duty to the family, to help secure his business interests through marriage. And what will you tell him?" Luta asked. Though he dreaded the answer. "I don't know," she said honestly. A week ago I would have said no, consequences be damned. But now, she squeezed his hand, now there are other considerations, other possibilities I hadn't imagined. They sat in silence for a long while, hands linked, both staring at the stream that flowed eternal and uncaring through the valley. Luta felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. Even if Serafina rejected the arranged marriage, what future could they have together? A Modoc warrior and the daughter of a wealthy mine owner, their union would be accepted by neither world. They'd be outcasts, belonging nowhere, struggling to survive on the margins of both societies. But when he looked at her profile, saw the strength in her bearing and the intelligence in her eyes, those practical concerns seemed to fade. Maybe some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. Maybe his grandfather had been wrong about love being a weakness. Maybe it could be the greatest strength of all. We should keep moving, Serafina said finally, releasing his hand and standing. We've lost too much time already. They remounted and continued east, leaving the valley and its memories behind. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the true high country, following ancient game trails through forests so thick the sunlight barely penetrated. By afternoon, they'd reached the snowline, patches of white appearing between the trees like scattered flour. It's early for snow at this elevation, Luta observed, his instincts prickling with unease. The winter is coming harder and faster than expected. We need to move quickly or risk being trapped on the wrong side of the passes. They pushed the horses harder, but the animals were tiring, their breath coming in great plumes of vapor. When they finally stopped to rest and water the horses at a small alpine lake, Luta's ribs were screaming with pain, and Serafina looked pale with exhaustion. But neither complained. They developed an unspoken understanding, a shared determination to see this journey through regardless of the cost. As Serafina tended to the horses, Luta scouted the area, looking for signs of game or danger. What he found instead made his blood run cold. Fresh tracks in the mud near the lakeshore, human tracks, at least a dozen men, maybe more. They'd passed through here within the last few hours, heading in the same direction Luta and Serafina were traveling. We have company, he called quietly to Serafina. A large group, armed and moving with purpose. Not random travelers. She joined him, studying the tracks with worried eyes. Could it be my father's men? He said he'd send an escort to meet me at Fort Klamath. Maybe they're searching for me. Maybe, Luta said, but his instincts were screaming otherwise. Or maybe it's something else. Those 3 men yesterday, they recognized you. If they reported back to others, word could have spread. Your father's wealthy and wealthy men make enemies. You think someone's trying to intercept us, Serafina said, her hand moving to her rifle. I think we need to assume the worst and hope for the best, Luta replied. There's an old Modoc hunting camp about 5 miles north of here, hidden in a box canyon. We can fort up there, see if this group passes by or if they're actively hunting us. They altered course again, this time moving with extreme caution, covering their tracks as best they could. Luta used every trick his grandfather had taught him, walking the horses through streams to hide their hoofprints, brushing away signs of their passage with pine branches, choosing routes over bare rock where possible. It was exhausting work, and with his injured ribs, every movement was agony. The hunting camp, when they finally reached it, was exactly as Luta remembered. A narrow canyon with high walls and only one entrance, a small spring providing fresh water and enough grass for the horses. Centuries ago, his ancestors had used this place to trap game, driving deer and elk into the canyon where they could be easily hunted. Now it would serve as their fortress. They made camp deep in the canyon, building a small fire that would be invisible from outside. As darkness fell, Luta climbed to a vantage point near the canyon entrance, settling in to watch and wait. Serafina joined him despite his protests, bringing blankets and coffee. You should rest, Luta said. I can handle the watch, with cracked ribs and a head injury, she replied, settling beside him. We keep watch together. 2 sets of eyes are better than one. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, brilliant and cold against the black sky. Below them, the forest was alive with night sounds. The rustle of small creatures, the occasional call of an owl, the distant howl of wolves. But Luta was listening for something else. The sound of men moving through darkness. The clink of weapons, the low murmur of voices. "There," Serafina whispered suddenly. Pointing to the east, Luta saw them then. Shadows moving between the trees, carrying shuttered lanterns that leaked thin slivers of light. He counted at least 12, maybe 15 men, all armed, moving in a search pattern. They were hunting something, and Luta had a sick certainty about what their quarry was. "Stay absolutely still," he breathed. "Don't move, don't speak." The searchers passed within 100 yards of the canyon entrance, close enough that Luta could hear their voices carried on the night wind. They were discussing strategy, debating whether to continue searching or make camp and resume at dawn. One voice argued for pressing on, insisting that the woman couldn't have gotten far. Another voice, rougher and meaner, suggested that finding her alive wasn't strictly necessary if they could recover her body and claim she died in an accident. Whoa. Serafina's hand found Luta's in the darkness, gripping hard. He could feel her trembling, whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. He squeezed back, trying to offer comfort, while his mind raced through scenarios. 15 armed men against one injured warrior and a woman, the odds were impossible. Their only hope was to remain hidden, pray that the searchers moved on. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the group continued north, their lanterns fading into the distance. Lutar and Serafina stayed frozen for another hour, making sure it wasn't a trick, that they hadn't left someone behind to watch and wait. Finally, Luta allowed himself to breathe normally again. "They're gone," he said quietly. "But they'll be back at dawn, searching more carefully. We need to decide, do we stay hidden here and hope they pass by? Or do we make a run for it under cover of darkness? A tisin. What do you recommend?" Serafina asked. "Honestly, both options are terrible," Luta admitted. "If we stay, we're trapped with limited supplies and no escape route if they find us. If we run, we're exposed, and the horses are exhausted. Either choice could get us killed. Then let's choose the option that keeps us moving forward," Serafina said with quiet determination. "I won't be cornered like a rabbit in a burrow. We run, we fight if we have to, but we don't surrender." Luta felt a surge of admiration for this woman who refused to give up even when the situation was hopeless. "We'll wait until the moon sets, about 3 hours from now. That'll give us maximum darkness for the first part of the journey. Then we push hard for the high passes. If we can get through before they catch us, we'll have the advantage on the other side. They won't know the terrain like I do." 3 hours, Serafina nodded. "Enough time to rest the horses and prepare. We should eat something, gather our strength." They returned to their small camp, but neither could manage more than a few bites of dried meat and hardtack. The knowledge that 15 armed men were hunting them had killed their appetites, replaced hunger with a tight knot of anxiety. Instead, they checked their weapons, distributed ammunition, and packed their gear for a fast departure. "Luta," Serafina said as they worked, "if something happens to me, if they catch us, I want you to know something." "Nothing's going to happen," he interrupted, but she pressed on. "Let me finish. If they catch us, I want you to promise me you'll run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't sacrifice yourself. Just run, get away, survive." She met his eyes in the firelight. "Promise me." "I can't promise that," Luta said flatly. "I won't leave you to them. Whatever happens, we face it together. You taught me that yesterday when you came back for me." "That was different," she protested. "It wasn't different at all." He moved closer to her, his hands finding her shoulders. "You said safe and alone, or in danger together. That works both ways, Serafina. I'm not leaving you. Not to them, not to anyone. My word on it." Tears gleamed in her eyes, reflecting firelight. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met." "Takes one to know one," he said, and despite everything she laughed. Then she was kissing him, fierce and desperate. Her hands tangled in his hair. Luta kissed her back with equal intensity, all the fear and uncertainty and impossible longing of the past days pouring into that single contact. His ribs screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain, pulling her closer. trying to memorize every detail of this moment in case there weren't any others. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Serafina rested her forehead against his. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered. "I know it's crazy. I know we barely know each other. I know there's no future for us, but I can't help it. These past days with you have shown me what life could be like with someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my strength instead of trying to diminish it. Look, it's not crazy," Luta said, his voice rough with emotion. "Or if it is, we're both afflicted. I've broken every oath I ever swore, abandoned every principle my grandfather taught me, all because I can't imagine completing this journey and never seeing you again." They held each other in silence, the fire burning low, the moon tracking its slow path across the sky. In a few hours, they would risk everything on a desperate flight through hostile territory. The odds of survival were slim, the chances of a future together even slimmer. But for this moment, none of that mattered. They had each other. They had truth between them, and sometimes that was enough. When the moon finally set and darkness was complete, they mounted their horses and slipped out of the canyon like ghosts. The forest was pitch black, navigation possible only because Luta knew every tree and rock from childhood explorations. They moved slowly at first, letting their eyes adjust, trusting the horses to find safe footing. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, 15 armed men slept and dreamed of rewards and violence. Ahead lay the high passes and whatever waited beyond. But for now, Luta and Serafina rode side by side through the mountain night, their hands occasionally brushing, their hearts beating in rhythm with their horses' hooves. The journey had become something neither had anticipated, a flight from danger that had transformed into something deeper and truer. They were no longer just guide and client, protector and protected. They were partners bound by trust and growing love, facing impossible odds together, and somehow that made even the darkest night seem a little less dark. Dawn found them high in the mountain passes, the world transformed into a landscape of stone and ice. They'd ridden through the entire night, pushing the horses to their limits, and now both animals and riders were approaching exhaustion. Luta's ribs felt like shards of broken glass, grinding with each breath, and Serafina's face was pale with cold and fatigue. But they were alive, and more importantly, they'd gained significant distance from their pursuers. The pass they were traversing was barely wide enough for the horses, a narrow shelf of rock that hugged the mountainside with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet on one side. Snow had begun to fall an hour ago, fat wet flakes that stuck to everything and reduced visibility to mere yards. Luta knew this was both blessing and curse. The snow would hide their tracks, but it also made the already treacherous path deadly. "We need to find shelter," Serafina called over the rising wind. "The horses can't go much further." Luta knew she was right, but finding shelter in this barren landscape of rock and ice seemed impossible. Then he remembered something his grandfather had told him years ago, a story about caves high in the passes where ancient spirits dwelled, places of power that could protect or destroy, depending on a traveler's intentions. At the time, Luta had dismissed it as superstition, but now he found himself hoping there was truth in the old stories. "There's a place," he shouted back. "Another 2 miles, if I remember correctly. A series of caves used by medicine men for vision quests. We can shelter there." They pressed on, the snow falling harder now, accumulating on the narrow path and making every step treacherous. Luta's horse stumbled twice, nearly sending them both over the edge, and only his quick reflexes and the animal's sure-footedness prevented disaster. Behind him, Serafina's mare was breathing hard, foam flecking its mouth. But the animal kept moving with the stubborn determination of its rider. When they finally reached the caves, Luta almost wept with relief. The entrance was partially hidden behind an outcropping of ice-covered rock, but once through the narrow opening, it expanded into a large chamber that went deep into the mountain. Ancient fire pits marked where others had sheltered here over countless generations, and smoke-stained walls bore faded paintings of spirits and animals. They led the horses inside, the poor animals trembling with exhaustion and cold. Lutar and Serafina worked together to unsaddle them, rub them down with what dry cloth they had, and cover them with blankets. Only after the horses were seen to did they allow themselves to collapse. "We made it," Serafina said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't think we would, but we made it." "We're not safe yet," Lutar cautioned, though he shared her relief. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "Those men won't give up easily. When the storm clears, they'll be looking for us." "Let them look," she said with fierce determination. "We're through the worst of the passes now. Another day, and we'll be on the western slopes, in territory my father controls. They won't dare follow us there." Lutar wasn't as certain, but he kept his doubts to himself. Instead, he focused on building a fire, using wood from an ancient pile that had been maintained by travelers over generations. The smoke would be drawn deep into the cave system before escaping through natural vents, making it nearly invisible from outside. Within minutes, blessed warmth began to fill the chamber. They sat close to the fire, sharing what little food remained in their supplies. The dried meat was nearly gone, the hardtack reduced to crumbs, and the coffee was just a memory. But cold water from melted snow and a few strips of jerky were enough to quiet their hunger. They'd survived worse over the past days. "Tell me about your father," Lutar said, wanting to understand what awaited them at journey's end. "What kind of man forces his daughter into an unwanted marriage?" Serafina stared into the flames, her expression complicated. "He's not evil, if that's what you're thinking, just pragmatic to the point of cruelty. After my mother died, he threw himself into building his mining empire. I think work was the only way he could cope with losing her. Over the years, the business became everything to him. More important than family, more important than happiness. And you became a tool to expand that business," Lutar said, understanding dawning. "A very expensive, carefully cultivated tool," she agreed bitterly. "The best tutors, the finest clothes, training in all the social graces that would make me attractive to wealthy suitors. He never saw me as a person, just as an investment that would eventually pay dividends through a strategic marriage." "Yet you defied him," Lutar observed. "Refused the marriage he'd arranged. That took courage, or stupidity." Serafina laughed without humor. "I'm not sure which yet. When I reach his compound and tell him I won't marry the Sacramento mine owner, he'll be furious. He might disown me, cut me off completely. I'll have nothing, be nothing in the eyes of society." "You'll have yourself," Lutar said. "Your integrity, your strength, your freedom to choose your own path. Those things are worth more than all the gold in California." She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, and he saw hope warring with fear. "And will I have you?" she asked quietly. "When this journey ends and we reach my father's compound, what happens to us?" It was the question Lutar had been avoiding, the impossible future that seemed to mock them with its complications. "I don't know," he admitted. "Your father won't accept a Modoc warrior as a son-in-law. My people won't accept me taking a white woman as a wife. We'd be outcasts from both worlds, struggling to survive on the edges of society." "I don't care," Serafina said fiercely. "Let them reject us. Let the whole world condemn our choice. I'd rather have 1 year of genuine happiness with you than a lifetime of comfortable misery with someone I don't love." "It won't be easy," Lutar warned. "There will be hardship, prejudice, violence even. People who see our union as an abomination, who'll do everything they can to destroy what we're trying to build. When has anything worthwhile ever been easy?" she countered. "We've survived armed men hunting us, crossed treacherous mountain passes in a snowstorm, and somehow found each other despite every obstacle. If we can do all that, we can face whatever comes next." Lutar wanted to believe her, wanted to surrender to the hope in her voice. But years of disappointment and loss had taught him to be cautious with hope, to expect betrayal and abandonment. "What if you change your mind?" he said. "What if you reach your father's compound and realize that giving up everything for a relationship with me is too high a price?" "I won't change my mind," she said firmly. But I understand why you doubt. You've been hurt before, abandoned by people who promised to stand by you. Your trust doesn't come easily, and I respect that." She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "So let me make you a promise, not the easy kind that costs nothing, but the hard kind that binds. When we reach my father's compound, I will tell him I'm refusing the arranged marriage. I will stand before him and declare my intention to choose my own path, even if it means losing everything he's ever given me. And when he inevitably demands to know what could possibly be more important than securing the family's future, I will tell him about you. About the Modoc warrior who saved my life, who treated me as an equal, who showed me what real partnership looks like. I will make it clear that my choice is you. Consequences be damned." The raw honesty in her voice, the absolute certainty of her conviction, broke something open in Luther's chest. For the first time since his mother's death, he allowed himself to truly hope, to believe that maybe, just maybe, happiness was possible for someone like him. "I promise you the same," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I will stand with you before your father. I will claim you openly as the woman I love, regardless of what that costs me among my own people. I will fight for us, protect us, do whatever it takes to build a life together. My word on it, and my word is iron." They sealed the promise with a kiss, and this time there was no desperation or fear in it, only certainty and commitment. They held each other as the fire burned low and the storm raged outside their cave. Two people choosing each other against impossible odds. Bound by promises that would either make or break them, they slept for a few hours, curled together for warmth, and when they woke, the storm had passed. The world outside their cave was transformed into a pristine wilderness of white, everything covered in a thick blanket of snow that sparkled like diamonds in the afternoon sun. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly deadly. "The passes will be impassable for days," Luther said, studying the accumulation. "Anyone trying to follow us will have to turn back or risk being trapped by the next storm." "So we're safe?" Serafina asked. "From immediate pursuit, yes," Luther agreed. "But we still need to move. The horses need better grazing than we can provide here, and our supplies won't last another day. We need to reach lower elevations where game is more abundant." They saddled the horses, which had recovered somewhat from their ordeal, and carefully made their way out of the cave. The descent from the high passes was treacherous, the snow hiding the narrow path and making every step a calculated risk. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses through sections too dangerous to ride. And once Serafina's mare nearly went over the edge when the snow gave way beneath its hooves. Only Luther's quick action, grabbing the bridle and hauling with all his strength, despite his injured ribs, saved the animal. By the time they reached the tree line, where the snow thinned and the path widened, both of them were exhausted beyond measure. They made camp early, not trusting themselves or the horses to continue safely. Luther managed to shoot a rabbit with his rifle, and they roasted it over their fire, the smell of cooking meat the most wonderful thing either had experienced in days. As they ate, Serafina asked questions about Modoc culture, genuinely curious about the traditions and beliefs that had shaped Luther. He found himself opening up in ways he never had with whites before, telling her about the seasonal migrations his people had followed, the ceremonies that marked important life transitions, the stories passed down through generations about how the world came to be. "Your people have such rich traditions," Serafina said. "It's criminal what's been taken from you, the land, the freedom, the ability to live according to your own ways. What's taken can sometimes be reclaimed," Luther said. "Not in the same form, perhaps, but in new ways. The world changes, and we must change with it or be swept away. The question is whether we can change without losing the essential parts of who we are." "And have you?" she asked. "Lost the essential parts?" Luther considered the question seriously. "I thought I had," he admitted. "I thought becoming caught between two worlds meant belonging to neither, meant losing my identity completely. But these past days with you have shown me something different. Maybe being caught between doesn't mean losing yourself. Maybe it means having the freedom to choose the best of both worlds, to create something new that honors the past while embracing the future. A bridge between worlds, Serafina said thoughtfully. That's what we could be together. Not white, not Modoc, but something new. Something that proves different peoples can come together in respect and love. A pretty idea, Luta said. But the world isn't ready for such bridges. They'll try to burn us down, then we'll rebuild, she said with the stubborn determination he'd come to love. Again and again, as many times as it takes. Eventually they'll get tired of fighting us, or maybe our example will inspire others. Change has to start somewhere, with someone willing to take the first step. They talked late into the night, making plans for an uncertain future, dreaming impossible dreams. They would find a piece of land somewhere between the mining territories and the reservation, a place where both cultures could meet. They would build a home, start a trading post perhaps, create a space where Modoc and White could interact on equal terms. It was naive and idealistic and probably doomed to failure, but it gave them something to hope for, something to fight for. The next morning brought them to the western slopes of the mountains, and the landscape began to change. The dense pine forests gave way to mixed woodlands of oak and madrone, and the snow disappeared completely, replaced by the rich earth and lush vegetation of the foothills. Game was abundant here, and Luta shot a deer that would provide meat for several days. They made camp early again, both needing rest before the final push to the Langley compound. As Luta butchered the deer, Serafina gathered edible plants she recognized from childhood explorations with her mother. She returned with her arms full of wild onions, mushrooms and herbs, enough to make their dinner of venison, something approaching a feast. They cooked together, working in comfortable silence, and when they finally sat down to eat, the meal felt celebratory despite their exhaustion. "Tomorrow we'll reach my father's compound," Serafina said as they finished eating. "Are you ready for that confrontation?" "No," Luta said honestly. "But I'll face it anyway. Some things are worth the fear they inspire. He'll offer you money to disappear," she warned. "A substantial sum, probably more than you've ever seen. He'll tell you that you're not good enough for me, that you'll ruin my life, that the kindest thing you could do is walk away." "And when I refuse," Luta asked, "he'll threaten you, maybe try to have you arrested on false charges or driven off by force." "My father doesn't accept defeat easily," she met his eyes across the fire. "I need to know you're prepared for that. I need to know you won't let his words or his threats change your mind." "My mind is set," Luta said. "Whatever your father throws at me, whatever obstacles he creates, I will not abandon you. You have my word, and I've told you what my word means." "I know," she said softly. "That's why I love you. Because when you make a promise, the whole world could be burning down around you, and you'd still keep it." They made love that night, with a tenderness born of trust and growing intimacy. No longer just two people seeking comfort, but partners committing to a shared future. Afterward, they lay wrapped in blankets under a canopy of stars, and Luta told her the Modoc story of how the first man and woman were created from the meeting of earth and sky. How they were meant to be equals and partners in all things. "That's how it should be," Serafina murmured sleepily. "Equals and partners, not one above the other, but side by side facing the world together. That's how we'll be," Luta promised. "Whatever comes, we face it as equals. No secrets, no lies, no pretending to be less than we are to make others comfortable. We'll stand together in truth and let the consequences fall where they may." As dawn approached and the eastern sky began to pale, Luta kept watch while Serafina slept. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation they'd been dreading, the moment when their relationship would be tested by the harsh realities of society's prejudices and her father's ambitions. But tonight they had each other, they had their promises, and somehow that made the approaching storm seem survivable. The Langley mining compound appeared in the valley below them like a small fortress, surrounded by high timber walls with watchtowers at each corner. Inside the walls, Luta could see several large buildings, warehouses, what looked like a processing mill, and a grand house that dwarfed everything else. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter with rifles slung over their shoulders. It was a display of wealth and power that made Luther's modest dreams of a trading post seem laughably small. "Impressive," he said, keeping his voice neutral, though his heart was sinking. This was the world Serafina came from, a world of wealth and influence that he could never provide. "It's a prison," Serafina replied, her voice tight. "Beautiful and expensive, but still a prison. My father built those walls as much to keep me in as to keep threats out." She looked at Luther, seeming to read his thoughts. "Don't let the size of it intimidate you. All of this means nothing compared to what we have. Love and respect can't be bought with gold or built with timber." They rode down into the valley as the morning sun climbed higher, and Luther noticed the moment they were spotted. Guards on the walls began shouting, and within minutes a group of riders emerged from the main gate, galloping toward them. Luther's hand moved instinctively to his rifle, but Serafina touched his arm. "They're my father's men," she said. "Let me handle this." The riders surrounded them, a dozen armed men on fine horses, their weapons drawn but not yet pointed. The leader, a thick-shouldered man with a scarred face, studied them both with hard eyes before focusing on Serafina. "Miss Langley," he said, his voice gruff. "Your father has been worried sick. We've had search parties out for weeks, thought you'd been killed or captured. Where's your original escort?" "Dead from fever at Fort Klamath," Serafina replied calmly. "This is Luther, the guide I hired to bring me home. He saved my life at least 3 times during the journey. I expect him to be treated with the respect he's earned." The guards exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of respecting an Indian, but the leader nodded curtly. "Your father will want to see you immediately, both of you. He's been," the man paused, searching for the right word, "anxious." They were escorted to the compound like prisoners under guard, the armed men forming a tight circle around them. As they passed through the massive gates, Luther felt the weight of civilization closing in around him. Workers stopped to stare, whispering behind their hands. Children pointed with wide eyes. Even the dogs seemed hostile, barking and straining at their chains. The grand house was everything Luther had expected and worse. 3 stories of imported lumber and glass windows, with a wide porch supported by carved columns. It was an eastern mansion, transplanted to the western wilderness, a monument to one man's refusal to adapt to his surroundings. They were led inside to a study that smelled of tobacco and leather, where a man sat behind a massive desk covered in maps and papers. Marcus Langley was in his 50s, grey-haired and distinguished, with the same storm-grey eyes as his daughter. But where Serafina's eyes held warmth and intelligence, her father's were cold and calculating. He looked up as they entered, and for a moment his face showed genuine relief. Then his gaze shifted to Luther, and the warmth vanished, replaced by icy assessment. "Serafina," he said, rising. "Thank God you're safe." When weeks passed with no word, I feared the worst. He moved around the desk as if to embrace her, then stopped, his eyes still on Luther. "Dismiss this man and tell me everything that happened." "Luther stays," Serafina said firmly. "Whatever you have to say to me, you can say in front of him." "Don't be ridiculous," Marcus snapped. "This is family business, not meant for hired help. I'll pay him his fee and send him on his way. Then we'll discuss your upcoming wedding to Henry Blackwood. He's been remarkably patient about the delay, but there are limits." "There will be no wedding to Henry Blackwood," Serafina said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. "I told you before I left that I needed time to consider. I've had that time, and my answer is no. I won't marry a man I don't love to further your business interests." Marcus's face darkened dangerously. "You would throw away everything I've built, every opportunity I've secured for you, over some childish notion of romantic love? That's not how the world works, Serafina. Marriage among people of our class is about alliance, about building empires. Love is a luxury we can't afford." "You're wrong," she said quietly. "Love isn't a luxury, it's the only thing that matters. Without it, All your empires and alliances are just empty monuments to wasted lives. She moved to stand beside Luta, taking his hand in full view of her father. This man, this Modoc warrior you're so quick to dismiss, has shown me what real partnership looks like. He treats me as an equal, respects my strength, values my opinions. During our journey, he's protected me from armed men, guided me through deadly terrain, and never once treated me as property to be managed. I love him, Father, and I choose him over all your carefully laid plans. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus stared at their joined hands, as if witnessing something obscene, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally settling on cold fury. "You would disgrace yourself with a savage," he said, the words dripping with contempt. "Throw away your breeding, your education, your rightful place in society for an Indian who lives in squalor on a reservation. Have you lost your mind completely?" "Choose your next words carefully," Luta said, speaking for the first time. His voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made the guards in the room tense. "You can insult me all you want, I've heard worse from better men. But if you speak disrespectfully about your daughter again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." "How dare you threaten me in my own house?" Marcus snarled. "I could have you hanged for less." "Then do it," Luta challenged. "Call your guards, have them try to take me. But understand that if you go down that path, you'll lose your daughter forever. She's stronger than you realize, and she'll never forgive you for harming me." "Father, please," Serafina interjected, her voice pleading now. "I know this isn't what you wanted from me. I know it complicates your plans, but I'm asking you to try to understand. These past days have shown me who I really am, what I'm capable of when I'm not confined by society's expectations. I can't go back to being the decorative daughter who exists only to serve your ambitions. I won't." "Then you'll leave this house with nothing," Marcus said coldly. "No inheritance, no family support, no protection from the society you're so eager to reject. You'll be a pariah, shunned by decent people, struggling to survive in a world that won't accept your unnatural union." "I know," Serafina said, though Luta could see the pain in her eyes. "I'm prepared for that. I'd rather have 1 year of genuine happiness with Luta than a lifetime of comfortable misery in a world that demands I deny my true self." Marcus turned away, staring out the window at his empire of walls and watchtowers. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older somehow, touched with something that might have been grief. "Your mother said something similar once," he said quietly. "When I asked her to marry me, her family objected, said I was beneath her, that our union would bring shame on their name. She chose me anyway, walked away from everything she'd known. We were happy for the years we had together, even as society made our lives difficult. When she died, I swore I'd protect you from that same hardship, give you a life where you'd never have to choose between love and security." He turned back to face them. "I see now I was protecting you from the wrong things. I should have been teaching you how to be brave like she was, how to choose joy over safety. Instead, I tried to cage you in comfort." Hope flickered in Serafina's eyes. "Does that mean—" "It means I'm a stubborn old fool who's been wrong about many things," Marcus interrupted. "But I'm not so proud I can't admit it." He looked at Luta with eyes that were still wary, but no longer hostile. "Tell me truthfully, can you provide for my daughter? Can you protect her from the hardships that will come?" "Honestly, I don't know," Luta said, refusing to lie even when it might serve his cause. "We'll face prejudice from both our peoples. We'll struggle financially, at least at first. There will be times when we go hungry, times when we question our choices. But I promise you this, I will never treat her as property. I will value her opinions, respect her strength, and stand beside her as an equal partner in building whatever life we create together. That's worth more than all the gold in California." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. "You know, that's almost exactly what I told Serafina's grandfather when I asked for his daughter's hand," he said. "He threatened to horsewhip me. We didn't speak for 5 years. He moved to a cabinet and pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are deeds to a property about 20 miles north of here. 500 acres of good land with timber, a stream, and some meadows suitable for grazing or farming. I bought it years ago, thinking I might build a summer house there, but never got around to it." He handed the portfolio to Serafina, who opened it with trembling hands. "Father, I don't understand." "It's yours," Marcus said. "Both of yours, if you'll have it. Consider it a wedding gift, or an inheritance given early, or my way of apologizing for being blind to what you needed. Use it to build that bridge between worlds you were talking about." At their surprised looks, he gestured to the guards. "You think I don't have informants? I've known about your plans since you discussed them 3 nights ago. My men have been tracking you since you entered my territory, making sure those hunters didn't catch you." "You helped us," Serafina said, stunned. "Why?" "Because despite my many faults, I do love you," Marcus replied. "And because your mother would have wanted me to. She always believed that different peoples could learn to live in harmony if someone was brave enough to show them how." He turned to Luta. "I meant what I said earlier. This won't be easy for either of you. Society will judge you harshly. My business associates will think I've lost my mind, and there will be threats from those who see your union as an abomination. But," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "if you're as stubborn as you seem, and if you love my daughter as much as she claims, you might just survive it. You might even thrive." "What about Henry Blackwood?" Serafina asked. "And your alliance with him?" "Let me worry about Henry," Marcus said dismissively. "I'll find another way to secure that partnership, one that doesn't require sacrificing my daughter's happiness. Besides," he allowed himself a small smile, "I'm starting to think there might be more profit in trading posts that bridge cultures than in yet another mining operation. Perhaps you'll let an old businessman invest in your venture, assuming you can stomach having me as a partner." "We would be honored," Luta said, surprising himself with his sincerity. This man had been everything he'd expected to hate, arrogant and dismissive, and casually cruel in his assumptions. But he was also capable of growth, of admitting error, of putting his daughter's happiness above his pride. That took a different kind of courage, one Luta had to respect. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity and awkward adjustments. Marcus insisted they stay at the compound while preparations were made, and though Luta felt uncomfortable in such opulent surroundings, Serafina's presence made it bearable. They spent hours going over the land Marcus had given them, studying maps and making plans. Marcus proved surprisingly helpful, offering advice about construction and trade routes while carefully avoiding any appearance of controlling their decisions. Word spread quickly through the territory about the mine owner's daughter and her Modoc lover, and reactions were mixed. Some of Marcus's business associates cut ties entirely, refusing to work with a man who would permit such a union. Others were curious, even supportive, seeing opportunity in the cultural bridge Luta and Serafina planned to build. The workers at the compound were divided, some openly hostile, while others seemed genuinely happy for Serafina. The Modoc response was equally complicated. Luta's grandfather sent word through intermediaries that he was disowning his grandson, declaring him dead to the tribe for choosing a white woman over his people. But Luta's sister visited secretly, bringing blessings and gifts, whispering that not everyone agreed with the grandfather's harsh judgment. Some of the younger Modocs saw Luta's choice as brave, a new path forward in a changing world. 2 weeks after their arrival, they were married in a ceremony that blended both traditions. A Yurok shaman, friend of Serafina's late mother, performed the binding ritual under ancient oaks, while Marcus and a small group of supporters watched. Luta wore traditional Modoc clothing that his sister had brought, while Serafina wore a dress of simple white cotton, adorned with beadwork in both Modoc and Yurok patterns. It was beautiful and strange, and perfectly represented what they were trying to create, something new that honored both their heritages. After the ceremony, they left the compound with Marcus's blessing and enough supplies to see them through the first difficult months. The land he'd given them was as beautiful as promised, a valley sheltered by hills with a clear stream running through it. They spent the first week living in a tent while they began construction on their home. a simple cabin that incorporated elements of both Modoc and settler design. As they worked side by side, sawing timber and setting foundations, Luta found himself thinking about his grandfather's warning. "Never let your heart lead you," the old man had said. "Never let a woman make you forget who you are." But Serafina hadn't made him forget who he was. She'd helped him become more fully himself, shown him that identity wasn't about choosing one heritage over another, but about integrating both into something richer and more complete. Neighbors began to arrive as word spread, some curious, some hostile, all wary. Luta and Serafina greeted them all with courtesy, offering trade and friendship without forcing anything. Slowly, cautiously, connections began to form. A white farmer who'd been having disputes with Modoc hunters over game rights found common ground at their trading post. A Modoc family struggling with illness received medicine from Serafina's carefully maintained supplies. Word by word, trade by trade, they began building the bridge they'd dreamed of. 6 months after their wedding, as autumn painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, Serafina told Luta she was pregnant. They stood together on the porch of their completed cabin, watching the sunset over land they'd claimed together, and Luta felt something he'd never expected to feel again after so much loss and disappointment. He felt hope, genuine and unshakable, rooted in the life they'd built and the future they were creating. "What will we tell our child?" Serafina asked, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "About who they are, where they come from." "We'll tell them the truth," Luta replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "That they come from two peoples who've been at war, that they carry the blood of both conqueror and conquered, oppressor and oppressed. We'll teach them both languages, both sets of traditions. We'll show them that strength comes not from choosing sides, but from honoring all the parts of themselves. They'll face hardship," Serafina said. "Neither world will fully accept them. Then they'll create a third world," Luta said. "The way we have. They'll find others like themselves, children of mixed heritage looking for a place to belong. And maybe if we do this right, they'll build something better than what either of our peoples achieved alone. A world where difference is celebrated rather than feared, where love matters more than bloodlines." As the stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, they remained on the porch. Two souls who'd found each other against impossible odds, who'd chosen love over safety and built something genuine from the ruins of their separate pasts. The journey that had begun with a simple job, protect a woman traveling home, had transformed into something neither could have imagined. It had become a love story, yes, but more than that, it had become a revolution, quiet and personal, but no less profound. Behind them, smoke rose from their chimney, carrying the mingled scents of Modoc herbs and settler cooking. Before them, the valley spread out in peaceful darkness, a bridge between worlds made real through courage and commitment. They had faced down prejudice and violence, had survived storms both literal and metaphorical, had built a home where none should have been possible, and somewhere in the night, perhaps in the wind that whispered through the pines, or in the distant howl of wolves calling to their mates, Luta could almost hear his grandfather's voice. Not angry now, but resigned, perhaps even slightly approving. The old man had been wrong about love being weakness. In truth, love was the greatest strength of all, the force that could bridge impossible divides and create new possibilities from old hatreds. Luta had taken a job to protect Serafina's journey home, but in the end, she'd protected something far more valuable: his capacity to hope, to love, to believe that the future could be different from the past. That was worth more than all the gold Marcus Langley could offer, worth more than acceptance from either of their peoples. It was worth everything, and having found it, Luta would spend the rest of his life protecting and nurturing it. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, indifferent to human struggles and triumphs, but beneath them, in a small valley where two worlds met, Luta and Serafina stood together. Proof that sometimes, against all odds and expectations, love really could conquer everything. 10 years had passed since that autumn evening when Serafina had told Luta about their first child, and the valley had been transformed beyond recognition. What had begun as a single cabin and a dream had grown into a thriving settlement that locals had started calling Bridgetown, though no official charter had ever been filed. The name fit perfectly, capturing the essence of what Luta and Serafina had built over the decade. A place where cultures met, traded, and slowly learned to coexist. The original cabin still stood, though it had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. 3 children now filled the house with noise and laughter. 9-year-old Jacob, who had his mother's grey eyes and his father's quiet intensity. 7-year-old Sarah, who seemed determined to befriend every person and animal she encountered. And 4-year-old Thomas, who was just beginning to understand that he existed in a world more complicated than most. All 3 were fluent in both English and Modoc, moved easily between cultures, and were living proof that the bridge their parents had envisioned could be made real. The settlement itself had grown organically around the trading post Luta and Serafina operated. A dozen families now called the valley home, some white, some Modoc, a few of mixed heritage like the founders. There was a blacksmith shop run by a former soldier who'd married a Shasta woman, a general store operated by a Chinese couple who'd left the brutal conditions of railroad work, and even a small school where Serafina taught children of all backgrounds to read and write in multiple languages. It wasn't paradise. Tensions still flared and old prejudices died hard. But it was something rare and precious, a place where different peoples could live side by side with mutual respect. Luta stood on the porch of their home on a crisp spring morning, watching the settlement wake to a new day. Smoke began rising from chimneys. Children emerged to do morning chores, and the sounds of daily life, hammering from the blacksmith, the lowing of cattle, voices calling greetings in multiple languages, filled the air. He was 40 now, his hair beginning to show threads of silver, his body carrying the accumulated aches of hard labor and old injuries. But he'd never been happier. "You're thinking too loud again," Serafina said, emerging from the house with 2 cups of coffee. She'd aged as well, laugh lines crinkling around her eyes, her hands roughened by years of work. But to Luta, she was more beautiful than the day he'd first seen her at Fort Klamath. Shared struggle and genuine partnership had a way of deepening beauty, making it something more than surface appearance. "Just counting blessings," Luta replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. Remembering how unlikely all of this seemed 10 years ago. "Unlikely but not impossible," Serafina corrected, leaning against him. "You taught me that. When everyone said it couldn't be done, you just quietly kept doing it until it was done." A rider appeared on the ridge overlooking the valley, and Luta's hand moved instinctively toward the rifle he still kept by the door. Old habits died hard, and there were still groups who saw their settlement as an abomination worth destroying. They'd survived 3 attempts at violence over the years, armed men who'd come to burn them out. Each time the community had stood together, and each time the attackers had retreated when faced with unified resistance. But as the rider drew closer, Luta recognized him and relaxed. It was Marcus Langley, now in his 60s, but still riding like a younger man. He visited the settlement regularly, had become something of a grandfather figure to the entire community, not just his biological grandchildren. His initial investment in their trading post had grown into a more extensive partnership, and his business connections had helped the settlement survive its vulnerable early years. "Grandfather!" Sarah came running from the barn, where she'd been helping with morning chores, her braids flying behind her. Marcus dismounted with a grunt and scooped her up, his stern business face transforming into something soft and indulgent. "How's my favorite granddaughter?" he asked, though it was a running joke since she was his only granddaughter. "I'm teaching Walks at Night's colt to take a bridle," Sarah reported excitedly. "Papa says I have good hands with horses." "Your papa is right about most things," Marcus said, setting her down. "Now run along. I need to talk business with your parents." Sarah scampered off, and Marcus climbed the porch steps with the careful movements of a man whose body was beginning to betray him. "Coffee?" Serafina offered, and he accepted gratefully, settling into a chair with a sigh. "I'm getting too old for long rides," he complained. "Should have brought the wagon. But I wanted to reach you quickly. There's news from Sacramento you need to hear." "What kind of news?" Luther asked, immediately alert. Sacramento was where the territorial government sat, where laws were made that could help or harm communities like theirs. "The complicated kind," Marcus replied. "There's a movement gaining support in the legislature, people who want to pass laws forbidding marriage between whites and Indians. They're calling it the Protection of Racial Purity Act, claiming that mixed marriages are destroying the fabric of society." Serafina's face went pale. "They can't do that. We're already married, we have children. Laws like that typically aren't retroactive," Marcus assured her. "Your marriage would likely be protected under grandfather clauses, but it would prevent others from following your path, make it illegal for new couples to do what you've done." Luther felt cold fury building in his chest. "So they want to trap us in amber, allow us to exist as an anomaly, but prevent our example from spreading. Make sure that what we've built here remains unique rather than becoming a template for change." "Essentially, yes," Marcus agreed. "The mining interests and land speculators don't like what you've created. This settlement proves that natives and whites can live together peacefully, that the land can be shared rather than taken. That threatens their narrative about manifest destiny and racial superiority. If they can't destroy you through violence, they'll try to contain you through legislation." "What can we do?" Serafina asked, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "Fight back," Marcus said simply. "I've been calling in favors, rallying support among the more progressive legislators. But what we really need is evidence that communities like yours work, that integration benefits everyone. We need testimonials from your neighbors, economic data showing increased prosperity, anything that proves the value of what you're building." "We can provide that," Luther said, his mind already racing through possibilities. "The settlement has grown every year, crime is virtually non-existent, and we've successfully mediated disputes between native bands and white settlers across 3 territories. Our model works, anyone with eyes can see it. Then we need to make sure the legislature sees it," Marcus replied. "I'm arranging for a delegation to travel to Sacramento next month. Testimonials, documentation, real people sharing real stories about how this settlement has changed their lives. Serafina, I'd like you to be part of that delegation. You're educated, well-spoken, and you can present your case in terms they'll understand." "I'll go," Serafina said immediately. "But Luther comes with me. This isn't just my story to tell, it's ours together." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I was hoping to avoid that. No offense, Luther, but having a Modoc address, the legislature might inflame prejudices rather than soothe them. These are men who still see your people as savages, barely capable of rational thought. Having Serafina speak might change minds. Having you speak might just confirm their worst assumptions. Then their assumptions need to be challenged," Luther said firmly. "I won't hide while my wife fights our battles. We stand together or not at all. That's how we've always done things, and we're not changing now." "Oh." Marcus sighed but nodded. "I expected you'd say that. Fine, we'll prepare carefully, make sure you're seen as educated and reasonable. Wear white man's clothes, speak perfect English. Show them that natives can be just as civilized as anyone else." "No," Luther interrupted. "I won't pretend to be something I'm not. I'll wear traditional clothing, speak both languages, and present myself exactly as I am. A Modoc warrior who's built a successful life through partnership with a white woman. If they can't accept that truth, then no amount of pretense will help anyway." "You're asking them to make a bigger leap than they might be capable of," Marcus warned. "I'm asking them to see me as human," Luther replied. "If that's too much, then their prejudice runs too deep to be changed by anything we say or do. But I have to believe that some of them, even just a few, might be capable of growth. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" The conversation continued for another hour, hashing out details and strategies. When Marcus finally left, Promising to send word about the delegation's departure date, Serafina turned to Luta with worry etched deep in her face. "This could go badly," she said. "They might use your presence as an excuse to dismiss everything we say, paint us as radicals trying to destroy traditional society. We could make things worse rather than better." "We could," Luta agreed. "But we could also change minds. Show them that the future doesn't have to look like the past. Someone has to take the first step, be the example. We've been doing that for 10 years here in this valley. Now we need to do it on a bigger stage." Over the following weeks, the settlement mobilized to support their founders. Neighbors wrote testimonials about how the trading post had improved their lives, how having access to both native knowledge and settler technology had increased their prosperity. The blacksmith documented how learning metalworking techniques from both cultures had made him more skilled. The school teacher compiled data on student achievement, showing that children who learned in multiple languages and cultural contexts actually performed better than those limited to a single perspective. Luta's sister, who'd reconciled with him years ago despite their grandfather's continued disapproval, arrived from the reservation with a delegation of Modoc elders. They spent 3 days in intense discussion, debating whether to support this effort or see it as further erosion of traditional ways. In the end, a slim majority agreed to provide written statements supporting the settlement as a model for peaceful coexistence. The night before they were scheduled to depart for Sacramento, Luta couldn't sleep. He rose quietly, careful not to wake Serafina, and walked down to the stream that ran through their property. The water gurgled peacefully over stones, and moonlight painted everything in shades of silver and shadow. This place, this valley, had become his home in ways the lava beds of his childhood never quite had. Here he'd built something lasting with his own hands and heart. "Can't sleep either." Serafina's voice came from behind him, and he turned to find her wrapped in a blanket, feet bare in the grass. "Too many thoughts," Luta admitted. "Wondering if we're making the right choice. If we should just stay here and let the world change around us, rather than trying to push it in new directions." "That's not who we are," Serafina said, joining him by the water. "We've never been content to just exist. We've always pushed boundaries, challenged assumptions, tried to make things better not just for ourselves, but for others who might follow our path." "What if we fail?" Luta asked. "What if we go to Sacramento, present our case, and they pass those laws anyway? What if our example isn't enough to overcome generations of prejudice?" "Then we'll have failed with honor," Serafina replied. "Knowing we tried our hardest, spoke our truth, and refused to compromise our principles for convenience. That's worth something, even in defeat. Besides," she smiled, "we've faced worse odds and survived. Remember that first night in the mountains, surrounded by armed men, certain we wouldn't see another dawn? We made it through that. We can make it through this." They stood together by the stream for a long while, drawing strength from each other's presence, the way they had countless times over the past decade. Whatever happened in Sacramento, whatever laws were passed or defeated, they would face it together. That had always been their greatest strength, the unwavering certainty that they were partners in all things, equals standing side by side against whatever the world threw at them. The journey to Sacramento took 8 days, traveling with a small delegation that included Marcus, 2 other settlers from the valley, and surprisingly, one of the Modoc elders, who decided at the last minute that his people's voice needed to be heard directly rather than through written statements. The travel itself was uneventful, but Luta could feel tension building as they approached the capital. Awareness growing that they were about to step onto a stage where their every word and action would be scrutinized and judged. The hearing took place in a grand hall that smelled of furniture polish and old wood, with legislators seated in tiered rows looking down on those who came to testify. Luta had never felt more conscious of his appearance, his traditional Modoc clothing and long braided hair marking him as different in a sea of black suits and pomaded heads. But he stood straight and proud, Refusing to show the nervousness churning in his gut, Serafina spoke first, her voice clear and compelling as she described their journey, the settlement they'd built, and the evidence of successful integration. She presented the testimonials and data they'd compiled, making a logical, reasoned case for why laws restricting intermarriage would harm rather than help the territories. She was magnificent, and Luther felt his heart swell with pride watching her command the room. Then it was his turn. He stepped forward, aware of the whispers and stares, the discomfort his presence caused. For a moment, standing before all those hostile faces, he considered making it easy for them, speaking in simple terms about peace and cooperation. But then he remembered his promise to Serafina and to himself. They would present their truth without compromise. "My name is Luther," he began, speaking in Modoc first, then translating to English. "I am Modoc, born in the lava beds, before your government decided that land belonged to them, rather than to the people who'd lived there for generations. I speak to you today, not to apologize for who I am, or to pretend to be something more palatable to your sensibilities. I speak as a man who has built a life that honors both his heritage and the new reality we all must navigate." He told them about his journey with Serafina, about the promises they'd made and kept, about the settlement that had grown from their commitment to seeing each other as equals. He spoke of the children being raised to honor multiple cultures, who moved between worlds with an ease their parents' generation could never quite achieve. He described the economic prosperity that came from combining different knowledge systems, the social stability that emerged when people of different backgrounds had real stakes in each other's success. "You fear that marriages like ours will destroy something precious," Luther continued, "that allowing our peoples to unite will somehow dilute racial purity and weaken society. But I tell you that the opposite is true. Our children are not weaker for carrying mixed blood, they are stronger. They are not confused about their identity, they are enriched by understanding multiple perspectives. They are not the end of something, they are the beginning of something new, and potentially better than what either culture achieved alone." He paused, looking directly at the legislators rather than down at the floor, as convention demanded. "You have a choice before you. You can pass laws that try to freeze society in amber, prevent change through legislation, ensure that the prejudices of today become the laws of tomorrow. Or you can have the courage to let the future unfold naturally. Trust that people of goodwill from different backgrounds can find common ground and build something beautiful together. The question is whether you're brave enough to allow that possibility, or whether your fear of change is stronger than your faith in human capacity for growth and understanding." The silence that followed his speech was absolute. Luther returned to his seat beside Serafina, uncertain whether he'd helped or harmed their cause. Marcus looked pale but determined. The Modoc elder nodded approvingly. Then one legislator began clapping, slowly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. Others joined in, though many sat stone-faced and silent, making their opposition clear. The vote, when it came 3 days later, was closer than anyone had expected. The Protection of Racial Purity Act failed by just 4 votes. It wasn't a resounding victory, barely a victory at all, but it was enough. Marriages between natives and whites would remain legal, and settlements like Bridgetown would be allowed to continue growing and evolving. On the journey home, Serafina rested her head on Luther's shoulder while their wagon rolled through familiar territory. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually changed minds, shifted votes, made a difference. We bought time," Luther corrected. "The battle isn't over. It'll never really be over. Every generation will have to fight these same prejudices in new forms. But yes, for now we won. That's something to celebrate." When they finally crested the ridge overlooking their valley, the sight that greeted them made Luther's throat tighten with emotion. The entire settlement had turned out to welcome them home, native and white standing shoulder to shoulder, children of all backgrounds playing together without consciousness of difference. Banners had been strung across the trading post. and someone had organized a feast to celebrate their victory. Their children ran to meet them, Jacob and Sarah and Thomas throwing themselves at their parents with the abandon of youth. "You're home," Sarah cried. "Everyone said you were going to save the whole world." "Not the whole world," Serafina laughed, gathering her daughter close. "Just our little corner of it. That's all anyone can really do, save their own corner and hope it inspires others to do the same." That night, as the celebration continued with food and music and stories, Luta found himself standing apart from the crowd, watching the scene with a sense of profound gratitude. His grandfather had been wrong about so many things. Love hadn't weakened him, it had made him stronger. Serafina hadn't made him forget who he was. She'd helped him become more fully himself. And the life they'd built together, impossible and improbable as it had seemed, had become a beacon for others seeking a different path. "Still thinking too loud," Serafina said, appearing beside him with that uncanny ability she had to know when he needed her presence. "Just remembering," Luta replied. "That day at Fort Klamath when I first saw you, I thought it was just another job. Guide the rich white woman home, collect my payment, move on with my life. I had no idea that journey would change everything, who I was, what I believed possible, the entire trajectory of my future." "Neither of us knew," Serafina agreed. "We were just two broken people trying to survive, me running from a life I didn't want, you caught between two worlds you couldn't fully belong to. But somehow we found each other, and in finding each other, we found a way forward that honored all the parts of ourselves rather than forcing us to choose." They stood together watching their community celebrate, their children playing with others who would grow up knowing that difference didn't have to mean division, that love could indeed bridge impossible gaps. It wasn't a perfect world, but it was their world, built through courage and commitment and an unwavering refusal to accept the limitations others tried to impose. Luta had been hired to protect Serafina's journey home, but in the end, they'd protected something far more valuable than physical safety. They'd protected the possibility of hope in a world that often seemed determined to crush it. They'd proven that different peoples could coexist with mutual respect. They'd created a bridge between worlds that would stand long after they were gone, maintained by their children and their children's children. As the stars emerged overhead and the celebration continued below, Luta wrapped his arm around his wife and allowed himself to feel the full weight of gratitude for this improbable, impossible, absolutely perfect life they'd created together. He'd broken his oath to his grandfather, yes, but in doing so he'd found something his grandfather had never understood. Love wasn't the enemy of duty and honor. It was the foundation upon which the truest versions of both were built. The journey that had begun with a simple job had become a revolution, quiet and personal, but no less profound. And standing there with Serafina beside him, their children laughing below, and their community thriving around them, Luta knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choices again. Every broken oath, every challenged tradition, every impossible risk had been worth it to arrive at this moment, this place, this life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.